lots continues to happen on the economic front, and that's why we have the Bottom Line panel. But things are also pretty hectic on the foreign affairs front, and that's why we have our Turning Point panelists. Joining us again tonight, as they will on a monthly basis this year, from Vancouver, Janice Stein, director of the Munk School for Global Affairs. From Boston, Ashraf Hegazy, executive director of the Dubai Initiative at Harvard. And here in studio, Dr. Samantha Nutt, executive director of War Child Canada, and Mark Sedra, senior fellow at the Center for International Governance Innovation. First, some quick background on topic one.
السلطة الفلسطينية محمود عباس.
When Mahmoud Abbas took center stage at the UN last week, his strategy was clear. With direct negotiations stalled, force the issue of Palestinian statehood by making the world body, stacked at least by the numbers in his favor, deal with it head on. At play, depending on who you listen to, everything from the very future of the Palestinians who live in a sort of limbo in Gaza and the West Bank, to the very security of the Israelis living right next door. There are those who feel that if this is ever going to be settled, Abbas had no choice, while there are other powerful voices who argue this plunges the Middle East into its most dangerous moment in years. For a lot of Canadians preoccupied with concerns closer to home and tired of the seemingly endless and often violent cycle of Israeli-Palestinian relations, there's an almost wake me when it's over attitude. But how dangerous is this situation? Or is it the wake-up moment the world has waited for? Time for some answers. And let's start with that danger question. Janice, you started. How dangerous is this moment for the Israeli-Palestinian issue?
I don't think it's a critical moment of danger, Peter. It is a wake-up moment. It's an inevitable moment, probably overdue. But what it isn't is the big moment, the turning point. That will not come unless there is meaningful negotiation between Israel and Palestine, which changes things on the ground. And we're not there yet. All right. Well, a lot of powerful people do think it's a dangerous moment. And when I hear danger, I think of violence that could occur. Ashraf, what are we looking at? How do you see it?
I'd actually say it's a dangerous moment for the role of Western countries in the international community, especially the U.S. And Canada, having supported the U.S. I think everyone is waiting for that very powerful image of American Ambassador Susan Rice raising her hand to veto Palestinian statehood and Security Council. I think that will be a turning moment to the influence of the U.S. and the international scene and its ability to lead from a moral standpoint. I think any country that also votes against Palestinian self-determination in the General Assembly will also be seen as having lost a lot of their moral standing.
All right. Let me bring it into the studio. Samantha, how dangerous?
Well, I want to pick up on what Ashraf said. I mean, I do think that one of the consequences here that will prove to be problematic is the U.S. has spent, Barack Obama specifically has spent a good part of his presidency trying to build goodwill in the Arab world, and this will certainly have an impact on their standing in the Arab world, which also then opens the door for regimes in Syria and in Yemen and in Iran and elsewhere that are already critical of U.S. foreign policy to then turn around and start pointing fingers and to leverage that domestically and regionally as well. And I think that is the really dangerous part in this.
Oh, all right, Mark, your thought.
Well, I think that, in fact, this could actually present an opportunity. Both Netanyahu and Abbas were given the opportunity to make very muscular, bellicose speeches at the United Nations. Both were able to rally their support bases behind them. So now is this opportunity to go back home and to pivot back towards negotiations and reconciliation. Now, whether they can do that is a big question, but there's a lot of enthusiasm that they can build on. I am, however, somewhat skeptical that Netanyahu and the Israelis are willing to meet those minimum conditions that Abbas has laid out for negotiations, being a halt of settlement activity, and secondly, to go back to those pre-1967 borders as a starting point with land swaps.
Does anybody here think that it presents well, I think we all agree that it does present an opportunity for negotiation, but does anybody here think that new negotiation could actually happen? Janice?
You know, Peter, I think it's not likely that either Netanyahu or Abbas will do this together. Neither side is willing to meet the minimum critical condition the other set down. But this really is an opportunity now for the Europeans to work together with the United States to impose some deadlines. It's not at all clear that there will be a U.S. veto. It's not clear how the votes are going to line up at all in the Security Council. The resolution may not get the 9 votes. So this is an opportunity for Europe and the United States to say this is the last serious chance for negotiations, to set deadlines and to push really hard now on both leaders to come to the table.
Deadlines work in a situation like this, Samantha?
I don't know. I think what we're seeing is a polarization of opinion, and the rhetoric that we're seeing right now coming out of the Middle East does not suggest that they're going to be capable of meeting any kind of deadline, or that there is sufficient goodwill to even attempt to do so. And there again, you know, the position that the United States has taken on this also compromises, I think, you know, their ability to be as effective and as active on this issue, and that's going to prove to be a big problem.
All right, what should we be looking for in the coming days? Ashraf, if you had to pick one thing, what would it be?
I'd be looking for the level of support from other countries in the UN General Assembly. I think whether it ends up being a 2/3 vote in favor of a Palestinian state or a 90% vote will actually make a difference in the amount of pressure that is available for the Palestinians to use on Israel, and on the amount of pressure on the U.S. and its ability to push Israel to make serious concessions.
Mark?
Well, I'm going to watch closely what's happening on the ground, and I think we already saw a disturbing signal today with the Israelis announcing new settlement construction in East Jerusalem, which is supposed to be the future capital of the Palestinian state. So that's surely going to set back any chances of negotiation. But also look at how Hamas will respond. Are we going to see Hamas? Are we going to see a narrowing of the gap between the Palestinian Authority, PLO, and Hamas, or will we see divisions remain? Hamas was quite ambivalent and even opposed to Abbas going to the United Nations.
All right, we'll leave it at that because we want to move on to issue number 2. Here's the background on this one. It all looked so easy at the year's start. A few weeks of demonstrations in Tahrir Square, a dictator toppled, and a new dawn for Egypt. Like the old domino theory, there were predictions the same play just might follow across North Africa and into the Middle East. To some degree it has, but in many cases it's been bloody and the outcome unclear. In Libya, Gaddafi appears on the ropes, but he's still inside the ring, even with full NATO backing to those trying to knock him out for good. In Syria, not a NATO plane to be seen, but lots of bloodshed as the Assad family continues its brutal assault on those trying to grab power. In Yemen, hundreds are dying seemingly every week, with the regime convinced it can crush attempts to bring it down. Even Egypt seems rocky in its search to redefine itself in the post-Mubarak world. Meanwhile, the world's attention at the beginning of the year, loving the arc of the story, now seems tired of the endless play. So where is this heading, and why should we care? All right, Janice, start us off again. Whatever happened to the Arab Spring? Are we in the Arab Fall here now?
You know, I think we are, Peter. Clearly, these very, very optimistic voices 6 months ago that this was going to be a peaceful, overwhelming march toward democracy were naive to the extreme. But nevertheless, there are some important changes. Elections postponed in Egypt, but nevertheless likely to happen. The Syrian government really under considerable pressure. A change of regime in Libya. These are not inconsequential changes in a region that was frozen for 40 years. So grounds for very cautious optimism. We're still in the military light version of the post-Arab Spring.
All right. Samantha, were we a bit naive? Did we expect too much too soon here?
I don't think it was ever going to be a march towards democracy. I think it was always going to be a stagger. You have, particularly in places like Libya, there is very little government infrastructure. There isn't a strong civil society presence. So, you know, it's going to be a difficult uphill battle. And I think that, like Janice said, I think it was extraordinarily naive to believe that, you know, we could wrap this up with a tidy little bow within a year. What concerns me, though, is the extent to which the groups that are now either seizing power or clinging to the bitterest of ends, in Syria and Yemen being great examples, that's going to continue to have a huge impact on civilian lives right at the time that we may be heading into another deeper economic recession. And this is the time when we need to be investing our aid dollars to start rebuilding that infrastructure. And I'm not sure where that momentum and initiative is going to come from, to be frank.
Ashraf, where do you see this one?
Yeah, I'm really looking closely at how bad things might get, especially in Syria. I think there's been an opportunity for the international community to help move things along a bit faster and with less ability for regimes like the Syrian and the Libyan to slaughter their own people. But we really missed a number of windows of opportunity to do that, and as a result, we're now seeing those regimes kind of pool their military power and bring it to bear in a hideous way on their people. So it's going to take a few years for even the most peaceful transition to really to have a sort of a happy, positive ending. So in Egypt, it's probably going to be a couple of years. In a place like Syria, it's going to be several years before we see the violence die down and we see a real transition take place, if it does.
Mark.
Well, I think that the term Arab Spring is somewhat misleading because it sort of conjures up this idea that all of these reforms and this transition can be completed in a season. But this is going to be a long, messy process. We won't know the result or be able to judge the outcome for months, if not years, as was already said. So, I think we have to temper expectations. One thing that's concerning me is we have to remember the economies in the region are a complete basket case. And the international community, particularly the G8 countries, have committed a lot of aid, but almost none of it has actually showed up on the ground yet. And that's causing some serious problems. Moreover, the impact of actually the events in New York surrounding Palestine, it's having an interesting effect where you're seeing some anti-Western and anti-U.S. ideas start to emerge, which we didn't see during the revolutions themselves. And so to me, that's something to watch and to be concerned about.
Right. Well, it's an interesting link then between the two issues. If there's a country, and I've got to take a break here in a moment, but if there's a country in this group that you're watching most, which would it be, Samantha?
Well, I'm watching Libya. I think that, there's an example where we're not entirely sure of the company we're keeping there. We don't know what the next few months are going to bring, whether it's going to be a genuine movement towards democratic development, strengthened civil society, more peaceful, prosperous, inclusive Libya, or whether it's going to degrade into a very serious and intractable civil war. And so for me, that's going to be a really important one to watch, and hopefully they'll emerge on at the other end much better off.
All right, Janice, a country.
Yemen, which is now really locked in a bitter internal civil war, which has far surpassed the original protesters. The protesters are marginalized, Peter, and this is actually one which has the capacity to spill over Yemen's borders and spill outside and have region-wide implications. It's a very dangerous and deteriorating situation in Yemen right now.
Just in a sentence or so, Ashraf, which country are you watching?
I'm watching Syria because it's at the nexus of a number of conflicts in the region. And if Hezbollah, for example, sees that their patron in Syria is falling, they might start taking some severe actions against Israel and raise the rhetoric against it in order to gain more support from Arab people. And that could start a very wide conflict in the region.
All right, Mark.
For me, it's Egypt. Egypt is the bellwether state in the region. situation. What happens in Egypt reverberates across the Middle East. We've already seen some splits between the military high council and the civil society groups that have been driving the revolution. We've seen some worrying anti-Israeli sentiment with the storming of the embassy and so on. So I'm watching Egypt very closely.
All right, we're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, where has all this placed Canada on the world stage? The Prime Minister has his thoughts, so does this table. That's when we come back.